You're listening to episode 256 of the Small and Supercharged podcast with Ria Freeman. Well, on today's podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Lucy Millar from Roon Dog Food. I call it Run, but it's got a accent. And Lucy's going to explain all this to us anyway. But lovely to have you here, Lucy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's Roon, basically.
Why is it Roon, not Run?
Well, Roon is a Scottish business, although I'm not Scottish. I joke that I'm Scottish-ish now because we've lived here for such a long time. My husband is Scottish, and our kids are Scottish, and our business is Scottish. And Roon is an old Gaelic word that means to have purpose and to have love for another being, which I just felt sums up dogs quite well. And it's quite nice that it also looks like Run, because dogs do that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I mean, I really should do, but I didn't know that. I just thought I knew it meant something more than just run, as in running, but I just think that, well, we're already learning and growing on today's episode.
Yay.
So Lucy, tell us all about your very good self.
Oh God, okay, where to start with that?
Wherever you like, I've got all day.
Oh, good. Okay, so, well, I've not always sold dog food. My original career, I would say in a past life, I was a classical musician. So I trained as a professional violinist. You might not know this either. You're looking really surprised.
Yes.
Yeah, I was a classical musician, not just classical, I was a Baroque musician. For a while, I went to a specialist music school and then a specialist music university. Studied at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Did my postgraduate in Baroque violin. Started my career in it, and then met my now husband. And I kind of always suspected that I wouldn't want to be a professional musician once I actually met someone who wanted to settle down, because that's your evenings and weekends done, basically. Right. And that it's not very compatible with normal life. And I was right. I tried to do that career for a while, and then we were living actually in Italy at the time. We decided it was time to move back to England, and whilst we did that, let's get a dog, because not busy enough. So on the drive from Italy to London, we decided that we were going to get a Labrador. We went and viewed a litter the next day, I think, picked one, and then got him in a few weeks' time, and life changed dramatically, pretty suddenly. So I went from having a serious phobia of dogs to being completely obsessed with my Labrador.
Hang on, you had a phobia of dogs?
Serious phobia of dogs. I'm not even entirely sure when that stopped, but from childhood, my earliest memory is being flung down some stone steps by a Labrador, and that stuck quite well. So it's been a bit of a journey.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, Lucy. I didn't expect there to be this much to start with.
Well, that's why I did say, oh God, where do I start? It's been a journey.
So was your husband very pro dogs then?
Yes, he's grown up in sort of rurally Scotlandy type way, where his uncle had gun dogs and went out and shoots and stuff like that. And Dave always thought that it would be really fun to get a working line Labrador and train him and compete with him and all the stuff that I said, don't be ridiculous, I would never want to do that. And then it sort of happened, and I became completely obsessed with our dog, completely obsessed. Went to training classes with him, got completely obsessed with training him, ended up training to be a dog trainer, and that just took over. And as that took over, the violin career sort of disappeared off the edge, because that just wasn't really who I was anymore. And I trained with a lovely lady where we were living in Surrey. And then we got the call that Dave was offered a job back home in Aberdeen. And we went and did that, and moved up, and I started my own dog training school. And how this has ended up with dog food was the question I would always ask new puppy starts is, what are you feeding your dog? Mainly to weed out the pretty dreadful food options that are out there, but also to try and sort of help advise and figure out, because there is no one food that suits everyone. And it was a really interesting way of researching what foods are not suiting, what foods are suiting, and gosh, why isn't that food suiting that dog? Because it should be. And then that slowly turned into selling dog food. It was a different business to what it is now. It was a business called Working Choice Limited that I started up with a friend, and we sold working dog food for working dogs. But that business, it never really got off the ground because life kept happening, flinging things at us. And basically, someone was shouting very clearly, "Don't do that." Just no, now's not the time. When I eventually decided that now was the time, we'd moved house, I think 4 times, had a son, and life had happened enough by that point. I spoke to the factory that was making the food, and they basically made life extremely difficult for me and said, we're not going to help you do what you want to do to make this food better and this packaging better, and anything that you want to do, we're going to say no to. And I got introduced to someone who was manufacturing cold pressed dog food, and we had a chat, and that turned into, I'm going to change manufacturer and get my nutritionist and basically make whatever food I want to in whatever packaging I want to, which was the dream all along. And that's how Roon was born.
So we're going to go back a bit. Obviously, we're not going to name any names of other dog foods because that's not who we
Absolutely.
are.
No.
But you said that there are some pretty bad dog foods out there.
Yeah.
When we're looking at the label of a dog food, what makes a dog food bad or good?
So, I mean, there's obviously it's a minefield. There's a complete minefield to dog food. There are thousands and thousands of different foods out there. Some have massive advertising budgets, which can make themselves look absolutely glorious and wonderful and everything that your dog could possibly need. And unfortunately, the more I've learned about the industry since I've got in it, is the more I've learned just how these brands are able to not necessarily tell the truth by using special terminology, all sorts of ways of making it sound like your food is better than it is, so that the average customer and dog owner will be reading the back of the packet going, well, that sounds impressive, and not actually knowing that it isn't. And this, I think, is the big problem. So there are brands out there that are obviously not a good food. I mean, we don't want E numbers in our dog's food. There's no need for it at all.
What is an E number? What role does it play in dog food?
It doesn't play a role. And we don't want it in our dog's food in the same way we don't want it in our kids' food. It's going to make them hyperactive. It's going to, I mean, there's no benefit to the ones that we're seeing. You don't need colouring in a dog's food. The dog can't see that. It's not necessary. That's for the human to think that it looks like your dog is eating peas and carrots. They're not. They're eating, it's brown food that has been dyed green and orange. And so we've got that end of the spectrum, and then we've also got our mid-range to fancy dog foods that look a lot better than they necessarily are, simply by saying things very, very carefully, like rich in beef. Something can be rich in beef if it's got over a certain percentage, and I should know off the top of my head what that is, and I used to know, but we're now just with Roon so far away from that sort of thing that I've completely forgotten what the percentage is, but it's not as high as you'd think.
No.
And contains chicken. Yes. How much is the question?
But that doesn't mean it necessarily contains like chicken breast, does it?
No, it doesn't. And unfortunately, and I find it incredibly frustrating, there is still no way of differentiating the different grades of animal protein that are used in dog food. There are ways that brands can word their ingredient list to make it look like, so fresh. There's a lot of brands that we use 80% meat, fantastic, and it's all fresh chicken. And that looks brilliant to your casual dog owner until you realize that actually this is a dry dog food. So if it's got 80% fresh meat in it at the point of manufacturing, how much meat is actually in this food once it has been cooked and all of that liquid has been boiled off? And that's a complicated, a bit of a tricky one, because you look at the maths and we're talking about a reduction of around 70% of the weight of that ingredient.
No.
Yeah. So
wow.
There's calculators online that could help you with it. Dry dog food ingredient calculators and stuff, where you can go, right, so this food has got 80% meat, of which we've got 40% fresh chicken, 12% dry chicken, 3% chicken this, and all that sort of stuff. And what frustrates me is that then leaves a really complicated maths issue for your dog owner looking at it when they just want to know how much chicken's in my dog's food, how much chicken should be in my dog's food. We don't know.
This is the thing, isn't it? You look at some dog food packets and bags of dog food and you think, oh, it's got this and this in. Is that even good? Is that needed? Is that what dogs want? And there's lots of, it's not even like dry dog food's the only thing. You can have cans, you can have things that are devised just for your dog. You can have little pouches, you can have trays, you can have, oh gosh, there's so much. It's very difficult to try and work out what is needed and what is marketing.
100%. And this is what's caused Roon to come about, really, is this speaking to hundreds and hundreds of dog owners through the dog training school, and the overwhelming vibe was utter confusion. And I'm gonna buy the most expensive food I can find, because then surely it must be the best one. And I'm gonna get something with the highest protein in it, because everyone tells us that high protein is really good, and the highest meat content, because we all know dogs should eat meat. And actually, when you get all sciencey about it, none of those things are necessarily true. High protein, that's great for humans. We know we need more protein as humans, don't we? Dogs actually, scientifically, in order to be healthy, your average pet dog needs 20% protein in its diet.
Gosh.
So then we're looking at foods that are like saying they're 45, 50% protein. What does that actually do? Do they need that? What's going to happen to their kidneys if they're eating all this protein and they can't actually digest it? We just don't know, basically.
And isn't there something like hardworking dogs would have different needs to a dog that
Absolutely.
lives in a house and doesn't do much?
Absolutely. So a working dog, for example, I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. I'm going to say I think it's up to then 22% protein.
So not a massive increase, actually.
It's not a big increase. And then that's different for growing puppies and lactating mums and all of these things. There's different degrees of how much protein they require. And that's just in order to be healthy. Obviously, let's add a couple of percent on top of that to then have super duper health and glossy coats and shiny eyes and all of these good things. But all of the marketing at the moment is pushing us, as with everything. And I think all pets were pushed towards what's good for humans. What do humans like to see? And let's market to that. So with Roon, I decided to go slightly idiotic, really, in terms of business, but let's create something that's actually just scientifically better for dogs. Let's not look at the fashion. Let's not look at anything that humans think dogs need. Let's speak to the scientists. So I've got a wonderful, wonderful nutritionist who is pioneering cold pressed dog food and the ingredients that go in it, all of the science behind that, and basically said, I want to make a really, really, really good food that doesn't have anything in it that doesn't need to be in it. Like you said earlier, we don't know. You see these ingredients. Is that a good ingredient? I don't know. Do they need it? I don't know. It sounds good, so I'll buy it. So instead, we've created something that has everything that they do need and nothing that they don't. Yeah.
So if I'm just getting a random bag of dog food off the shelf at a dog shop and it's dried food, how is that made? Is that baked? Is that, because you said cold press, which I want to get into exactly what that means, but how is that different to a bag of kibble that looks a bit like biscuits I can get on the shelf? How is that made? What happens when that's made versus what you do?
Yeah, so there are lots of different ways of manufacturing dog food now. Traditionally, the method is called extruded. So a dry extruded food is a food that has been all the ingredients got together and then mixed together and cooked at a relatively high heat, probably around 180, 200 degrees. And that's cooked down and squished together. And then it goes through a drying process, which is much, much higher. Again, I don't want to say figures off the top of my head and then be told that's completely wrong, because having researched all this a few years ago, this isn't what I use in my business. So I think the figures I read was something around 250 degrees, and that's for about half an hour. It goes through this drying process.
It's like a powder at this point.
No, so this is it's like I wouldn't use the word pate, but it's basically, it's been squeezed through a
Right.
die and it's been cut, and then it has to be dried and rolled so that these little biscuits end up as hard biscuits, and
I get you.
it's stable, and then then it's going to last for years and years in a bag. And then at the end of the process, they have to make it nutritional value. So it gets sprayed with sort of a gravy, so sort of a bit of extra minerals and vitamins and flavorings and stuff. And these tend to get added in at the end when it's been through that traditional process, so that it has got the nutritional levels that it should have. So that's the traditional way. Then there's other ways of making it. So baked. Baked is another one. So everything gets sort of smushed together and chopped, and then I would assume baked in an oven. I don't know, I've not done it, but it's another way of doing it. And there's ways of doing that at relatively low temperatures. I don't know what the cooking times would be. And then you can have freeze dried. That's quite an exciting newish one. So we know that freeze dried stuff is supposed to keep the nutritional value, but then make it dry because it takes all the moisture out and you just have to rehydrate it. With cold pressed, what we do is we take each individual ingredient, we treat it to the minimum possible temperature for that specific ingredient to make it safe to handle and super easy to digest. And then we press it all together for a matter of seconds at a minimum temperature of about 55, 60 degrees with a tiny little burst of steam, and squeeze it through the press. So at the end of the day, we are looking at ingredients that haven't really been treated more than about 180 degrees for a very short time.
Why is that good?
That's good because we're not damaging the ingredients. So proteins, for example, if you cook proteins at high heat, it denatures them, the protein chains fall apart, and you don't end up with the same quality that we actually need. It's not as easy to digest. It's not going to have the same nutritional benefits. For things like the vitamins and minerals, we can put those in right at the start because we're not heating them. Basically, we're just giving them a little warmth. So then all of the nutrients are locked in, all the flavors are locked in. You end up with a very, very, very dense nutrition. So each pellet is very, very good for dogs, obviously, but you end up feeding less than you would of a normal dry dog food.
I was going to say this.
Yeah.
Because I know previously when I've looked at different quantities of dog food, because I genuinely I have been that person.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are, I'm not going to say cheaper, because I don't always think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but a very expensive dog food and a very cheap dog food, one, I mean, maybe very cheap is different, but a well-priced one and a very expensive one, it's not necessarily that the most expensive one is the best from what it seems to offer. Where was I going with this? So yes, the quantities seem to vary hugely for the same size of dog. And I find that very confusing. And I think, again, from a public point of view, you're looking going, well, this bag of dog food is, I don't know, let's say £30, and this one is £60. But actually, the £60 one will last you at least twice as long as the £30 one. So it's actually much better value, for example.
For example, exactly. So that's really what you want to be looking at is, well, which one's going to last longer? What is the actual price per day rather than the price of the bag? But that's not that easy to work out.
No.
Along with everything else on the back of the bag of dog food, that gets tweaked to look better than it necessarily is. And it just adds to my long, long list of frustrations as a dog owner. Generally, the feeding guide on the back of the bag is fairly vague and will be this is your general weight. Is a small, medium or large dog, then this is how much you should be feeding per day. But small, medium and large covers a huge variance. Also, how much exercise is that dog doing per day? All of this has a bearing on how much they actually need to eat. So when you're looking at the back of food, it's very difficult to compare one to another. I always think of it like when you go to the supermarket and you're trying to get a decent priced loo roll, and they're all priced completely differently. And this one is this pound per roll, and this is this pound per sheet, but you don't know how many sheets are on that one. And it's actually made impossible to compare them. Very clever. And it's the same with a lot of dog food brands, is how can you really work out which one you feed less of without buying it and trying it? It's tricky. So in order to make that easier, on the back of a bag of Roon, we've got the weight of the dog and the exercise level, low, medium, high, and very high, so that you can see actually how much of a difference that is in terms of how much they should get fed each day. And it does make quite a big difference. But it is less than it would be with a traditional dry food, for sure.
So we were talking earlier about the protein levels in dog food as well, and what's in dog food. So what is in your dog food?
It depends on the recipe. So for example, let me get one. So in our chicken, we have got dried chicken because it's a dry food. We're not going to put fresh meat in a dry food. Well, that's obviously at some point it was fresh,
Yes.
but not at the point where it gets mixed into this. And that is quite often the case with dog food brands that list their ingredients as fresh. Well, they're not fresh anymore. So let's just list it as it is, and then we can compare the actual weights. So for example, in our chicken one, we've got 27% dried ground chicken. So it's dried ground chicken, basically means we've used a special rendering process on that chicken to treat it at the lowest possible temperature for that food, chicken, to be really, really, really gentle on tummies and safe for us to handle, because we're going to be handling it, and shelf stable for 6 to 12 months at least. But it's still got all of the goodness in it. We've then got chicken fat, and that is a slightly liquidy one because we can't use just dry ingredients when we cold press. It has to squeeze together and stay together. We also use a small percentage of chicken protein peptides, which is a really exciting ingredient. I get very overexcited about sciencey things. Chicken protein peptides is basically chicken protein. So it is a really, really focused, super easy to digest form of protein that just sort of bumps up the quality even more. And that comes in a liquid form as well. And then we've got the chicken liver. We use sweet potato, tapioca, yellow pea, pea fibre, a bit of beet pulp and seaweed, and then some joint aid. And all of those things are in there for a reason.
And what's funny is I knew what each of those were.
Well, isn't that nice? You should know what the ingredients are in your dog's food. There shouldn't be anything having to Google.
I've seen stuff before, and you see, to be fair, I see it with human food as well. You pick up a packet of something and you think, right, I know if it's a cake, it should have, if I'm making a cake at home, it's got flour, eggs, sugar, and something butterish, like butter or whatever in it. And I pick up a cake and I'm like, I don't know what most of those things are.
Yeah, that's a cake.
And that's a cake, yeah. So with a dog food, you look and you think, I can't pronounce half the words. And I like to think I'm, fairly good at reading. And I look and think, no idea.
What's that? Why is that there? Why is that there?
So it's quite hard to make a food like you make it.
I think it's hard for a brand to make a food like I make it. This is not an easy way to sell dog food. Yeah. So I understand why dog food brands are not doing this. I completely understand where they're just going down what, this sells. We've done our research to find out what sells, and that is what we will make. And I've kind of done the opposite. So I've done the research of what should we be feeding our dogs? Yeah. I'm going to make that and then try to help people to understand why. It's not easy.
No.
Because we are programmed with all of the messaging that's out there to think that our dogs need a certain thing. We think that they need all the meat. And in a dry food, that's simply not true. It just isn't. If we're raw feeding, even then, it's not true. They need other things as well. They need to be able to get their vitamins and minerals and everything that they need. And you can't actually get that just from meat. There needs to be other things. So when we create a balanced diet, and that's the key word, is balanced, because a complete dry dog food needs to be a balanced recipe. We look at, okay, so here are the vitamin and minerals that we want to use. Here are the dry ingredients that we want to use together. Now, what amount of each thing can we use in order to create the perfect food? And you would not believe how complicated it is. My poor nutritionist has put up with a lot from me, because it took us a year to create our first recipe. I would go to her and say, right, this is brilliant. Can we just change that to another 0.5% more of that one? Deep sigh, understandable sigh. Yes, I'll start again. And that's, that's the difference it makes. So when I came and said, actually, I think I really want to add joint aid into this recipe. These ingredients are so powerful. We need a tiny bit. It's only going to make a difference of like something like 0.6% or something. This is really easy. Surely we can just slap that in there. I'll start again.
Oh,
And
bless.
she's put up with a lot. She's wonderful. But it really is not a case of let's just add a tiny bit more of that and then just reduce that by even 0.5%. It unbalances an entire recipe. And the science is, it's wonderful when you look into it. But then when you look into it, you can look at brands of dog food and just go, well, hang on a second, who created that recipe? How is that okay? I know that's way too much vitamin D. What's that doing in there? And um, yeah, you start finding out a bit and then you find out a lot.
I can imagine. And from a training point of view, did you notice that the food that the dogs were fed had an impact on their general behavior and their trainability and all those kinds of things?
Yes, absolutely. Which is another reason why Run is tailored the way it is it was about 10 years of training dogs and asking the question and seeing the results and putting two and two together and figuring out exactly what was going on. Is more often than not, the dogs that were showing very hyperactive, difficult to manage behavior were either being fed on the very, very low quality foods that were out there, or they were being fed on the very, very expensive foods that are very, very high protein. And this is what frustrates me, is this is what we're being told we should be feeding our dogs. When you look on Google, there's all of these wonderful articles about, oh, high protein's brilliant, fantastic. But then you look at who's written it. It's been written by a dog food brand that sells a very high protein food. There is nothing out there, unless you look really, really, really hard, that actually talks about the science of it. And what is going to happen to the dog that is eating a super duper high protein food? First of all, it's going to come out in its poo, which means its organs have to do more work in order to process it. But also it's going to come out in their behavior. It's got to. They've got all of this energy and sort of exuberance for life, and they can't quite cope with it. Some dogs absolutely can. Some dogs definitely can't. And that's why I always say, yeah, get a really great food, but it's not necessarily going to be perfect for your dog just because it's really perfect for your friend's dog. We need to look, which is why we've got a range of recipes. But no, I definitely know the brands that we will not mention that almost always caused hyperactivity. And it was really, really interesting to see. And the more dog owners I speak to now that have switched over, and were particularly the ones that were a little bit harder to convince, because I mean, our protein level we've got for the chicken is 28% crude protein in the chicken. That is considered at the lower end of dog food brands out there at the moment. You can get lower, you can certainly get lower, but it's at the lower end for a high quality brand. And you can get up to 50% crude protein in a dry dog food is the highest I've seen. I'm sure you can probably get higher. And it's difficult to explain to the owners that are feeding something like that and expect to feed something like that. They then try Run and go, wow, they were a different dog. That's really interesting. I had no idea it was the food causing this. Yeah, it can be. Definitely.
Gosh. It is all so linked together, isn't it? It's not that our training is one thing and our feeding is another and our exercising is another.
No, it's a
Everything is.
holistic, everything together situation. Obviously, changing your dog's food is not necessarily going to change their behavior overnight.
No.
Also training as well and exercising the right way, but all together, we should be able to get this really nice balance.
No, definitely. So when you started, what was the first food that you launched with? Which one?
It was the chicken.
It was the chicken.
Talking about it, it's the one that I've got the label closest to hand, so I can read off my ingredient percentages. But it was the chicken I launched with. The plan was originally to launch with 3, so we were going to launch with chicken, fish, and I think originally I was going to launch with a turkey. So it was going to be 3 adult foods. But after a year of researching everything, Roon was finally ready to launch in April 2020, right as everyone was locked away. and nothing was happening, and it was incredibly difficult. And I had to do a massive pivot on how the business was going to launch, and it was suddenly launching as online only, which meant I really needed a massive marketing budget, which I didn't have at all. So instead of launching with the full range as it was at the time, we just launched with just the chicken. And I think it was about a year maybe until the fish was ready to launch. I could be completely wrong about that. It could have been more like 6 months. It's all a blur. But I feel like it was about a year of just having one recipe, which is not easy.
No.
I don't know many dog food brands that have just one recipe.
But now you've got chicken, fish.
We've got chicken, fish, and poppy, which is a combination of the two. And then we've got working dog foods, we've got a turkey, and we've got a beef.
Because that's the thing, you've got the normal pet dog range.
Yeah.
And then you have also got working as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
What's the key difference there?
So, well, I'll start off by explaining why they're in the different ranges. So with our premium range is what we launched with first. The reason I launched with the premium range was let's just launch with something that is going to appeal to the most possible dog owners. We've only got one recipe, not one recipe. If we've only got the one, let's launch with one that is going to have the mass appeal. And then the fish was a very obvious one to bring out as well. And then I thought, you know what, I need a puppy food. Absolutely need a puppy food, because the recipes that I was launching were just for adult dogs. There's a lot of brands out there now that sell a food for all stages of life. But when I spoke to my nutritionist about this, she very firmly said to me, no, I'm going to create the best possible recipes for you. And that means they need to be stage specific. I'm not going to do anything that anyone else is doing simply because it's easier for a business or easier for an owner. Let's just make better for dogs. So that's why we brought out the puppy food that is specifically just for growing pups, and it's a mix of the chicken and the fish. And it made sense for that to be for pet dogs as well. Then when it came down the line to launch a working dog food, I wanted to be really, really careful about what that was going to be, because my previous business was working dog food. Working dog food was my comfort zone. It was where I really knew the most. So I wanted to launch something that was basically fab, really, really good dog food that would suit working dogs. And that's why we've launched the turkey as a working dog food, is because it's basically a super duper premium food. And you don't get a lot of that in working dog land. It's got the joint aid added to it, like all the other recipes do. Turkey is a very premium ingredient. It is a very expensive protein to use. And it made sense to then launch it so that it could be for working dogs, and therefore ever so slightly cheaper as well, because working dog food doesn't carry VAT. But the turkey is very much working dogs simply because it is a super duper awesome recipe. And we wanted to make sure that I wanted to make sure that there was a super duper awesome premium recipe out there for working dogs. The beef, that one was chosen and designed as a working dog food because it's our only one that has got grain in it. So
Right.
all of the recipes are grain free except for the beef, which has got barley and oats, and they're in there for slow energy release to help dogs that are out working all day not have energy spikes.
That makes sense. So since you launched at the start of a global pandemic, I imagine it's been an exciting journey over the last few years. What have let's go for the lows first. We'll go highs, but what have the lows been on that journey? Because launching a new brand is hard going. Launching a brand against very established competitors with massive marketing budgets, that's not easy. Launching in the middle of launching at the start of a global pandemic it still is around, not easy. What was the specific low on your journey?
Oh, I've had to pick one. I mean, not easy is a big understatement. It was very stupid. I think it was. It wasn't good timing. I wish I'd been able to launch it even just 6 months sooner. It would have made all of the difference to this business. Especially because when COVID hit and Brexit hit, there were massive shortages of dog food in the UK, and everyone was panic buying, understandably. And no one's going to panic buy a brand that they've not heard of before. So we missed out on that, whereas an awful lot of my competitors, that's where their business suddenly took off. but no, it was very difficult, basically launching in tumbleweed of not only does no one know what Roon is, but they've also just bought a year's supply of dog food in just in case no one's really looking to buy anything new. Um, the lowest low, I would say, would be when my courier, who, let's not name any names, my courier at the time decided to change the goalposts on me. So I shopped around a lot for a courier so that I could make sure that the food could get out to everybody. That wasn't easy in itself, lots and lots of meetings. Finally chose one, and they said, right, we need you to ship to, as a startup business, 5 different addresses a week. That's it. And you would think that's easy. It's not easy, actually, when you're selling a premium brand. And at that time, it was only available in the 15-kilo bags. Very difficult to convince anyone to switch their dog over to just a 15-kilo bag. I mean, I didn't make things easy for myself at all. But we were just about managing 5 bags a week pretty quickly. And then turned around and I got an email from my account manager just a few weeks in saying, unfortunately, as you have not met our quota of 15 addresses a week, we're going to close your account effective immediately.
15 addresses a week?
15 addresses a week. So I phoned him straight away, got on the phone, and oh yes, no, well, because so many businesses went online during COVID, we had to change that to stop too many new businesses coming in. So yeah, we changed that to 15. Oh, did we not tell you? Oh, I think we should have told you. And yeah, so I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry. There's nothing I can do. My hands are tied. We'll be closing your account. I can give you a week to get up to 15, but we'll be closing your account. And bearing in mind, I was just at about, scraping by at 5 orders a week, which I was pretty chuffed with at the time, actually, considering I didn't have an advertising budget. No one knew this food existed. There was no way I was going to get to 15. And that was, I think, the lowest low, when you've put everything, blood, sweat, tears, all the money you do have into launching this business. And then suddenly, all of the couriers have closed their books because everyone's gone online. There is no plan B. There is no one else that's going to deliver this for you. And your couriers turned around and basically gone, oh, well, actually, we want to take on some bigger customers, so we're going to change what we're telling you have to do. It was devastating. Oddly, I went into sort of scary bear mode, and somehow managed to convince them by speaking to my account manager's manager and being really quite firm. Somehow managed to wheedle an extra 6 months instead of a week, and basically given 6 months to get up to 15 addresses a week, which I knew actually was going to be fairly impossible without an advertising budget anyway, but hey, it's 6 months I didn't have. So I managed that, and when the 6 months came and went, and I wasn't quite at 15, I think I was at 14. Some weeks it was up at 20. Some weeks it was just below 15, and they used that as it needs to be at least 15 every week. It can't be 1 week we're at 30 and 1 week we're at 14. It's got to be 15 every week. So they tried to get rid of me again, and I didn't let them. I'm still with them now.
Oh wow! Oh, I love that.
They tried, but it was incredibly difficult time and just devastating, I think, as a small business. There may have been tears on the phone to the courier.
I can understand that.
Account manager. And yeah, well.
But if you can't get the product out, it doesn't matter how amazing your marketing is. If no one can get it.
Exactly. It was horrible. It was a really bad time. That's probably the worst it's been. I mean, we've had bigger issues as well. Bigger issues because once established, when there was that big storm, not last year, but the year before, Storm Arwen, knocked out all the power in Scotland. No one could get anything anywhere. We lost power at the factory, I think, for 2 weeks. Ooh. And people by that point were buying the food and expecting it and needing it, because hands up, who buys their dog food with a sensible time in advance?
I don't.
No one? No. I don't. I make it and I run out. So I completely get it. Everyone buys right when they go, oh no, the dog food bin's nearly empty. We've got another meal. We better order some. expecting it to come in time. And then suddenly we had, I think it was a week or it was 2 weeks of not being able to get anything out of the factory. That was hard. But, you know, you go on.
On a positive note, though, let's go high now. What have been the highs along your journey so far?
Oh, gosh, that's difficult to pick from as well. So I think the first big high was getting chosen as one of Vodafone's small businesses to shout about. That might have been I think it was November 2021. That was very exciting. So I saw a thing where Vodafone had said we're looking for small businesses that have used the internet in a creative and unexpected way. Like, well, that's me. This wasn't supposed to be an online business at all. Put my application in and got chosen as one of, I think it was one of 20 businesses in the whole of the UK to shout about. And they made a lovely little video about Roon and the other business as well. That felt really, really good. That was lovely. And then been chosen recently by Theo Fetus as one of his favourite businesses of the week on his, oh gosh, what's it called?
Small Business Sunday.
Small Business Sunday, that's it. That was lovely as well. I think recognition has been really nice because every time there's any recognition for a teeny tiny business, it feels like the best thing ever because you're working so hard.
What's really cool about that is that I'm one of Theo's SBS winners too, and they had this really cool event in February this year in Birmingham. They had, when you're talking earlier about your violining, that's not the term, violining. There was this amazing group, a quartet, I believe, were they all violins? They were definitely all strings, called something like the Capriolis or and anyway, they were there playing like pop songs on their violins. Incredible. I was absolutely mesmerized by them. Hopefully they'll be there this time when you come.
I know a lot of these people that are in these from back in my days of band camp.
They were amazing. You could like put suggestions in. You had an app, so I did that. I loved. I've actually got a bit of. I recorded them playing on my phone because it's so cool.
Love that. But well, yeah, I'm looking forward to going next year.
Sorry, I diverted you then because when you're talking earlier, I thought, oh my gosh, I must remember their name because it's a bit left field. And then when you started speaking, I thought, oh my gosh, she was an SBS winner. She's going to see them.
Yes. Well, if they're there, are they there every year?
I think they're an SBS winner as well.
Ooh.
I'm going to send you the information after this. I'm going to stalk them, find them, and send you the information.
Yes. And I'll let you know if I already know them.
Oh my God, that'd be a full circle of life. So sorry, I got distracted. Recognition is really cool, and that's
recognition. Yeah.
Is it nice as well seeing the dogs that you're really helping?
Yes, it's absolutely wonderful. And I was actually at an event this last weekend called Pee in the Park, which I just love the name because up here in Scotland we've got Tea in the Park, which is a music festival, and the logo for that is a giant T. And now that I've got Pee in the Park for dogs, and the logo is a giant grass pea with a dog cocking its leg on it, and I just love it.
Oh, I love that. That's good.
That logo, which is why I had to go, and ended up sponsoring it as well, and it was absolutely amazing because so many of my customers came. I know that we're a Scottish business, so a lot of my customers are in Scotland because they want to buy as local as possible. But I had never expected so many of them to turn up at an event that I did. And it was absolutely amazing to have them all come into the tent and like, oh, this is so and so. They would never eat their food before, but now they go absolutely giddy for their meals because they love it so much. And that means a lot. That's really lovely when you've managed to make a difference, because not just for the dog, but for the owner as well. I love a fussy dog challenge because I'm fairly confident that they'll like this one. And then, what a difference that makes, not only for the dog, but for the stressed out owner as well, who just wants their dog to enjoy meal times. So it was lovely getting to meet them and snuggle them as well, the dogs.
Yeah, not the owners, that'd be a bit weird.
Very weird.
So what's to come from Roon moving forward? Because you've come a huge way in actually not much time at all during a global pandemic.
Ooh, what's to come? What can I say?
I say, what can you say? I know you've got lots of things to come, but what are you allowed to tell us?
Well, we've got plans for sort of some additional things, so not just food, but a few other food-related items. Really looking to launch our own treat range. So at the moment, Roon has a lovely range of hand-baked, very, very crunchy training treats that are more like sort of a bedtime biscuit. My boys love them at bedtime. But I really want to make something completely different that's not out there yet. I can't really say what it is.
No, no, no,
But
don't give us give us a spoiler, but not a
yeah,
spoiler that's detrimental to you.
well, the food itself, when I very first got samples of this food made, we did our very first test batch. I tried it on my dogs and went, oh my God, I've nearly lost an arm. They love it so much.
Oh wow.
And they'd always liked their food. I do not have fussy dogs. They'd always enjoyed their food, and I've always used their food as training treats. But this was on another level. This was, oh my God, give me more. This is incredible. And so before even launching Roon, I had the plan to launch a side line of treats that were going to be very similar. And I even had a little name for it, which was good enough to treat with a T apostrophe eat. Good enough to treat.
Ah.
TR apostrophe eat. And it was basically because I've seen how nuts dogs go for it. I use it as training treats in my puppy classes that I still run. And people describe the puppy food as puppy crack. It's really, really, really yummy. So I really would love to have a treat version of the food. And that's the plan for the next thing. It's surprisingly difficult to make.
But
Because of our pressing process, it is very difficult to get the balance of having, less ingredients, because you don't need anywhere near as many ingredients in a treat as you do in a food, but ingredients that will still squeeze together in a press and become a pellet. We're struggling with that. So doing testing just now, but hopefully watch this space. There'll be something even yummier than the food to use as a really high value treat.
excellent. And thinking again about your kind of whole business journey, what tips would you give somebody if they're thinking of starting their own business?
I don't know. um, plan a lot. So when I first spoke to my manufacturer about making this, we had this lovely, exciting phone call that was supposed to be just a bit of a chat and a bit of advice, and turn into him saying, you know what, I like you, I want to help, I'll make it for you. I thought, oh, this would be great. So, we'll just knock up some recipes and we'll get it out in a couple of weeks. Yeah. It was
A
a
year.
year and 2 months before anything was actually ready. And that was with constant working in the background, and through all sorts of issues of trying to parent a child as well, and technically being a stay-at-home mum and also trying to launch a business. Don't do that. That I would definitely recommend. Don't do that. Get someone else to somehow look after your child so you can do that. But all of the planning takes an absolutely astonishing amount of time. Even just choosing the right packaging, the amount of meetings and web searching and everything, it took me a year to settle on paper packaging because I had to research everything else first. And, maybe I'm a little bit pedantic in just how much research I do before launching things, but what's the point in going, oh, well, I'll just drop all of my values here and I'll just launch it in plastic because that's easy. That's not the point of the entire business. Was, if it's going to be good for the dogs, let's be good for the planet as well, and good for everything. I could have made life a lot easier by just cutting corners in many, many ways. But plan, keep planning, do a bit more planning, and then try not to stress about the fact that you've got another 6 months of planning before you're ever going to have a product, because you want to be proud of the product that you launch with. And although I could have launched with someone else's recipe, I could have launched with someone else's packaging, and that would have been ready in a few weeks probably. I wouldn't have been proud of it.
No.
So this is me, but in dog food form.
I love that. Now, for anyone that's been listening and thinking, oh my God, I need to try some of that for my dog, you do samples as well, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got samples on the website that you can order, and you just pay for postage and packaging
Brilliant.
of each food.
And can you tell us all the places we can find you online. I'm also going to ask if there's anything I've missed after this, but as we've said, go to the website to get the samples. We need to know the website.
So the website is www.rundogfood.com. There's no accent on it because no one's going to be able to type that in.
Internet.
Rundogfood.com, exactly. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, which is @rundogfood. Those are the main places to get hold of the food and samples online. Very, very, very much like it when people tag @rundogfood on Instagram or Facebook so that we could see your fuzzy friends and see who's getting to eat the treats. But yeah, those are the main places to get hold of it.
And is there anything else that you would like to add before I let you go off and live your life / find your children?
Hiding from my children. This is lovely. Let's keep talking. I can't think of anything else that we've missed.
Well, I've loved our chat. I've learned even more, and obviously, as I work with you anyway, I felt like I was quite up on this, but not. I really wasn't. I know a lot more now, particularly about you as a violinist.
Yes, that was right.
Violinist. Woohoo! Doing well. But also, I do think it is, as we said to start with, feeding, like horse feeding, is a mystery. Dog feeding is a mystery. I've never owned a cat, so I don't know. But there's so much competition out there. There's so many options, and everybody, I think, well, maybe not everybody, but the vast majority of people want to do the right thing by their animals. It's not through negligence that most people don't achieve that. It's because it's just overwhelming.
And brands make it very difficult because they want you to buy their product. You know, they might not sell as much if they really were very honest about what went in it and where it's from and all of this stuff. So that's, you know, with Roon, it's all about being clear and honest. And if anyone gets in touch and wants to ask a question about the food, that's not a problem. We'll always just answer the question. Whereas I'm constantly getting contacted by people saying, well, I've been feeding this for a few years and I contacted the brand to find out about this ingredient and they just sort of fobbed me off. And now I feel like they're hiding something. So, well, I'm sure they're not hiding something, but I'm also sure they don't want to tell you.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
No, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Lucy. It's been a dream. People can find you, track you down, order some samples, and hopefully have more Roon dogs on the go.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ria.